Panel, our afternoon panel of political strategists, the best in the game. Grahame Morris, Bruce Hawker are with us. Thanks both for joining us. I want to start with the 100 days of the Abbot Government, and Grahame, the Prime Minister's virtually invited us to judge how they've gone. I showed a scorecard a little earlier. From my perspective, we can bring that up again and have a look. I scored them well on stopping the boats because they're nearly there, despite the criticism about the secrecy and whatnot, but not too well on some other fronts. Scrapping the carbon tax and the mining tax, they're not there yet. Fixing the budget, well, things are getting worse. What do you reckon? How do you think they've gone? 100 days in. What sort of score do you give them, Grahame?
I reckon the government's about 1 for 50. I'm not sure, I think you could say Christopher Pyne sort of got run out by somebody, or else he accidentally ran himself out on the education stuff. But in fairness to him, he's actually still controlling the infield and whatnot in the Parliament, and I suspect he'll have a good second innings. But I think the foundations are there. Look, whether you're a cricket team or a government, you need a little bit of luck. Always. Julia Gillard had no luck. Kevin Rudd had lots of luck and just didn't do anything with it. But you think, who could have dreamed that Drongo Snowden would leak all that stuff, and all of a sudden, out of 100 days, you'd lose 2 weeks over Indonesia? Who would dream that, Holden would pull out now? Why not 2 or 3 years ago when they were going to? There are a number of things there that were quite awkward and need a bit of luck. But on the other side, some of the foundations, I think, have been built, and tomorrow some of the economic foundations will get a bit stronger.
We'll get into that, the budget stuff, but
yeah. But some of the things, Tony Abbott is a very deliberate man, and he's having a few inquiries into some important things. The financial system. There will be one on tax soon. There's one on infrastructure. There are childcare. There are a few things there that he's actually just getting the foundations right before, and getting rid of the Labor mess, but before he launches the sort of Abbott plan. And that's not bad.
You mentioned bad luck on the Indonesia spying revelations and Holden to an extent as well. Isn't, though, the point here that it's the unexpected events that really decide how a government goes and how it should be judged? It's how they handle those unexpected events.
Yeah, I think that is true, David, that people get a bit of an impression for government for how they handle some of the difficult things, as they did with, Julia Gillard, as they did with John Howard, as they've always done. But what is it? Canberra sort of has 5 seasons: spring, summer, autumn, winter, Labor. And after Labor, whether it's Whitlam or Keating or Rudd and Swan and Gillard, the poor old libs are going to come in, sweep up the mess, and blow me down, they're doing it again. It is hard following Labor immediately, and poor old Joe Hockey and Tony Abbott have got to do it. And, have they had a perfect start? No, they haven't.
Bruce Hawker, I'm guessing you're probably not going to be as generous in your scorecard for the first 100 days of the Abbott government. How have you seen it?
I think it's been appalling, David. I think they've had a very, very weak start. It suggests to me that they haven't really done any planning for transition to government, or they never intended to keep a lot of these promises, and they thought they'd get rid of them in the first 100 days and then start again sometime in the new year. You look at what they've done. They said they'd turn back the boats. Well, all they did was get into a big fight with the Indonesians that Abbott hasn't sorted out yet. They said that then they got into an internal fight between Hockey and Truss over Grain Corp, and Hockey ends up getting a bloodied nose over that. They said that they were going to implement Gonski, then they weren't, and then they were again. So there's complete confusion over that issue as well. And now, of course, you see Truss and Hockey, after having a fight, get into the ring together as some sort of a tag team operation and decide that they're going to take it up to Holden and dare them to leave. And what happens? Holden does leave. So whenever you look at any of these decisions that have been made in the first 100 days, you've got to say it's been very messy. It has not been a clean transition to government at all. And frankly, they've been going around breaking a lot of promises, and I don't think they've finished doing it yet. I think we're going to see more as time goes on. So here's a bloke who's spent 3 years attacking Labor over broken promises, and Julia Gillard in particular, and he's throwing promises out the window like they're confetti.
I want to look at who's doing well and not so well in this Parliament as they head into the break, who perhaps needs a break more than others. We're going to take a quick break, though, try and fix some of the technical issues that we've got down here as well. Stay with us, though. We'll look at how some of the key performers have gone. Don't go away. To Grahame Morris and Bruce Hawker about the first 100 days of the Abbot Government and I guess this new Parliament generally, which is now drawn to a close for the year. I want to look at some of the key players, who's done well, not so well. Treasurer Joe Hockey, I think it's fair to say, has been front and centre through many of the key moments in the short life of the Abbot Government. There was the rejection of the foreign takeover bid for Grain Corp, for which he copped a fair bit of flack from the business community. And then, of course, Holden announcing that it's going to end production from 2016. It came after, or day after, Joe Hockey said this in the Parliament.
Come clean with the Australian people about their intentions here, right? We want them to be honest about it. We want them to be fair dinkum. Either you're here or you're not.
He's been accused of goading Holden into leaving. We heard Bruce critical of Joe Hockey in particular over that. But Grahame Morris, do you think Joe Hockey has been, or how do you think he's gone? Has he been a bit of an ideological backbone for the government, do you think, so far?
Well, I think the Treasurer has actually performed quite well. Look, a couple of years ago, people wondered about Joe as Treasurer, and then during the lead up to the election campaign and during the campaign, I thought he performed extremely well, and so did the business community. And in the Parliament, I think if you would say, who is one of the dominant figures, and it should be the Treasurer, but it has been, but a lovely mixture of fact and aggression and light and shade and humour. And you think, oh, thank goodness we've got somebody in the Parliament who can blend that. Some of the decisions, I don't know about the wheat distribution sort of system sale, Grain Corp. I just don't know. One day everyone will sit down and have a cup of coffee with Joe and he'll explain fully what it was all about. It did confuse the message a little bit. But look, he's got a big day tomorrow. And look, I hope everyone sort of understands tomorrow. Tomorrow is the sort of economic figures, just where things are. And I suspect everyone has to understand that the journalists will use probably two figures. One is the big figure. What is the total debt as of sort of now?
Which will be something like total deficit,
which would be 40-ish. And then the journalists will pick it apart and say, well, hang on, how much of that is the new government tidying up the Labor Party mess? So there'll be two figures. And I think everyone's just got to accept that that's what it's going to be. But look, it's a big day for the Treasurer tomorrow, and I suspect he'll handle himself well, as he has done in 100 days.
And some of the other key players in this government, there's the Prime Minister, of course, Chris Pyne. You gave him a bit of a touch-up earlier, but Scott Morrison, any others?
Chris Pyne has done well in the House again. Scott Morrison, in a difficult area, is holding his own. And on the flip side, well, I'm just not sure. I think at the moment, in the first 100 days, it's hard to say that there are a whole bunch of new stars. But I'll tell you what. People don't see this, but a new government coming in has 150 new friends, best friends, been there for years, rubbish. But every minister has got to see them and listen to their views. And I think that is one of the things that nobody really sees. I do, but others don't. And that is business community, welfare groups, interest groups, all going in to see these new ministers and saying, look, this is what we think. Could you put that into the mix? And that is priceless.
Bruce, looking at the performers, the key players on both sides, who's done well, not so well in your view?
Well, I think Hockey has performed extremely badly. You talk about the mess he got into with Truss, saying he wouldn't be bullied, and then he did allow himself to be bullied. We've already discussed what happened with Holden. He led with his chin on that. Grahame says there's a bit of humour in his presentation. Yeah, well, a bit of humour in the way in which Larry, Mo and Curly Joe might have presented themselves to the Australian Parliament as well. I don't see anything particularly clever about Joe Hockey, and I think Matthias Cormann and others are breathing down his neck. So I wouldn't give him much of an endorsement at all. I think people like Peter Credlin, the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff, have got their work cut out because a lot of these ministers are really champing at the bit. And, she's tried to enforce some discipline, and people like Scott Morrison have made it quite clear and that they're not going to succumb to that without publicly trying to denigrate her. I think she's, having been through that role as Grahame Morris has as well. Everybody knows that the transition from opposition to government is very tricky, and the sorts of things that you could impose on your ministers or shadow ministers in opposition you can't really do in government unless you've laid down the rules very clearly at the outset. So look, I think they've performed, as I said at the outset, poorly. It's really hard to find a good performer amongst them. I think Abbott's going out of his way to try to say, oh, these aren't broken promises, because he doesn't want to be tagged in the same way that he managed to tag Julia Gillard. But I think he's heading down that path, and I think he's going to have to really rethink his approach to government internally and externally. In other words, how he runs his own office and how he runs the cabinet, as well as the way in which he presents to the Australian public. Otherwise,
what about on the Labor side, Bruce? Who do you give a tick to so far?
Well, I thought that Bowen did an extremely good job in that interregnum between the change of leadership in government and the election of the new leader for Labor, and I think he's continued to perform well, and I think we'll see tomorrow him taking the cudgels right up to Hawker and others and taking on a lot of these issues around MAIFO. For my part, I think it's incredible that they're going to go out there and start blaming Labor as being a big spending government when they themselves are a big spending government. If they were a small spending government, they might have an argument, but they're spending $22 billion on a ridiculous paid parental leave scheme, which no one wants. And if they were going to ditch any of their election promises, this should be the one that they ditch, and they would be able to save a mozza out of that. So, before they go around attacking Labor for being big spenders and having to dig us out of this problem, they should be looking in their own backyard and looking at the cost of some of the promises that they made in the election campaign that they're about to roll out over the next 4 years. First and foremost, paid parental leave, $22 billion.
But that hasn't started yet, and it does have a funding mechanism. It's paid for largely by the business community. With tomorrow's figures, Bruce, well, it is paid through with a company tax levy.
Passed on to the electors, of course, as is always
perhaps,
the case.
But it's a company tax levy, not at a cost, all of it to the budget bottom line. On the figures tomorrow, you've got to admit there will be a fair degree of blame sheeted home to Labor for the deteriorating deficit.
Well, I think Labor was making a point before the election to say that our exports were starting to feel the pinch, that we weren't getting the receipts that we were getting previously, and that it was going to be tough in the coming years. Well, guess what? It is going to be tough, and the government's going to have to manage that. That is their problem now. They can spend as much time as they like blaming the previous government for it, but they'll only get so far with that. And at the end of the day, they've got to accept responsibility for some of the big spending measures that they've introduced, including, as you said, the $8.8 billion that they've just given to the Reserve Bank, the $3.1 billion that they're not going to have as a result of ditching Labor's quite sensible fringe benefits tax package. So, they're going to have to answer for those measures as well. Plus this so-called direct action program which is going to do nothing to help climate change, but which is going to be a direct impost on taxpayers.
Grahame, is it too early for the government? Because they seem to be pushing it all off to the May budget, the decisions to actually turn the budget around. They're not doing it at the moment. Should they, if things are as bad as we were led to believe, and certainly economists agree, surely some steps need to be taken now.
No, May is right. We've got the Audit Commission that's having a look about where should a government operate, where shouldn't it operate. And no, May is right. But tomorrow is very, very important. Look, for 6 years, the Labor Party has been pouring perfume onto an economic dung heap. And tomorrow, at the Press Club, poor old Joe Hockey is there with the hose and is trying to clean up the house. Tomorrow is the start. But the budget in May is going to be a very, very serious and very important document. Tomorrow is hosing out the shite out of the house.
Okay. And looking forward,
Can I say that?
You have said that. This is live. The challenges for next year. What does firstly the Abbot government and then the opposition need to achieve next year? Is it all about the budget next year for the government?
I would start again after the budget and say, righto, that was the Labor era, and you know, we've tried to sort it out. Now let's look at what the Abbot team wants, and that sort of starts with the budget to me. You know, you can't sort of go past the budget and just keep blaming Labor, although, you know, they'll be the PS on a lot of stories. But after the budget, I hope and believe that the Abbot team will simply be saying, this is what we promised, this is what we're doing, there's a few reviews we're waiting for, but by geez, we are here for the long term and more to the point. And I think Labor's got to realise this, that little ads are being done now, and every local ads, and every time a local Labor Party member votes against this carbon tax, ads will be being done saying, did you vote for the carbon tax? You didn't, but your Labor vote is still voting for it, and he's going to want to reintroduce it in 3 years' time.
Bruce,
this vote's silly.
Just finally then, Bruce, and briefly, what do you see as the big challenges for both sides?
Well, I was a bit worried about the carbon tax, as you know, David, when Labor decided to oppose it, but since then, you know, that's just faded into insignificance compared to all the other problems that the government's got. I think that they're going to have a good hard think about government in the break. I don't think they've spent any of the last 3 years thinking about government, and that's been the real problem for them. They're going to have a big rethink about the way in which they operate internally, and that's going to be the big thing for them. If they can do that, then they might have a chance. But I don't think they're going to change their ways.
All right, we've got to wrap it up. You'll both be back next week. I'll be off, though. So Merry Christmas to Bruce Hawker, Grahame Morris. Thanks for all your contributions this year. And we'll see you on Sky News next week. I just won't be here, but we'll see you soon.